You don't know flag. You don't know flag.
Welcome to You Don't Know Flag, a podcast full of stories about retro gaming, retro computing, video games, arcade games, and technology from a guy who was there and still is. My name is Rob O'Hara, but for the next 30 minutes, you can call me Flag.
Episode 142, Star Wars Toys.
Hello, and welcome to episode 142 of You Don't Know Flag. Today is October 8th, 2013, and I am your host, Rob Flack O'Hara. On today's episode of You Don't Know Flack, we will be talking about Star Wars toys. On today's show, I have a very special guest, Mr. Earl Green of thelogbook.com joining me, so I hope this will be an entertaining episode. Before I call Earl, I need to load the rest of the show segments into my trusty Commodore 64 computer. So while those load up, we have a few minutes to chat during this week's Loading Time.
Loading time. Loading time. Loading time.
The first thing I wrote here on Loading Time is one single word. Furlough. For those of you that don't know, I work for the federal government. And so I found out, basically the same time as the rest of you, that I was going to be furloughed. I had heard rumors that I might get furloughed. Last week, on Monday, I called in sick. And basically I was told to watch CNN, which I did, and CNN told me that I was furloughed and not to come in. There's a whole bunch of things that goes along with that. I cannot use any government equipment right now. I can't use my government laptop. I can't check my government email. And I'm not to work. It's actually against the law for me to work right now, and I'm not being paid. So this is actually a good time for me to catch up on podcasts, projects, and things like that around the house. We've painted the front door. We just watched Gravity, the movie. We have done a lot of little things, but the other thing we did today was go to the credit union and figure out how we can borrow money from our thrift savings plan to make our house payment next month. So it has been a very interesting, I know there was a furlough in the early, I think 95 is what they said. I started with the government in April of 95, so I don't remember if I was there during that furlough or not. If I was, it didn't make an impact on me, but this one certainly has. The last time I wasn't married, I didn't have 2 kids, I didn't have 2 car payments, and I didn't have a big house and a big house payment. So, I don't know. Lots of stuff on Facebook being talked about on the furloughs, on the news. I don't feel like anybody quite gets it right. I don't, people post things on Facebook that don't understand who's being affected by this. They say, well, if these government people have been deemed non-essential, then good, then fire them and get rid of them, which is, asinine, really. As I tried to explain to somebody, just because there weren't any fires in your neighborhood last weekend, you don't get rid of the fire department. So, especially working in IT, it is, I don't know, a little bit of a ego ding to be told that you are non-essential personnel. But honestly, for the past 20 years, I've been told that I'm non-essential every day, except for when things break, and then I become very essential. When networks go down, when servers go down, when services are no longer available, when critical infrastructure that's used by the government cannot be accessed, then I become very critical. So, it's interesting to see what their definition of essential and non-essential is. But, it is what it is. So, I am not sitting around wallowing. I am using this time to the best of my ability. And my kids still have to go to school. I still have to pick my kids up from school, so I can't, go on a cross-country road trip. I can't go on vacation. I still have to be around. But we are enjoying this time as much as we can, and we'll worry about paying bills when that comes around. Anyway, enough of government furlough talk. Let's talk about news. Since I posted the last episode, which was a few weeks ago, if you don't know Flack, I've started another podcast, or actually what I've started calling it is a tubecast. That's because they are videos that are being posted on YouTube. And that tubecast, doesn't really roll off the mouth, tubecast, is Sprite Castle. You can find out more about Sprite Castle at spritecastle.com, and what it is a series of short videos that consist of me playing Commodore 64 games. So I'll be playing some new games, some old games that are probably, if you're familiar with old computer games and old, even console video games, classic arcade games. I'll be playing a lot of games that you're familiar with and that you've seen, and I'll probably be playing some that you've never seen before. The shows right now are averaging right around the 10-minute mark. I have some longer ones scheduled. There may be some that are shorter than that. So the idea is just to show a game, show how to play it, and move on, So it's a little fun little side project. But anyway, that's at spritecastle.com. So, there is not an iTunes feed yet for Sprite Castle. I'm probably going to make one here very shortly. If you want to follow Sprite Castle, there is an RSS feed on spritecastle.com, or you could go to the very new project that we are launching this week, which is throwbacknetwork.net. Now, some of you know that I'm doing a show with my friend Sean and my friend Dor, and we do another podcast called Throwback Reviews. And on Throwback Reviews, we started talking about retro movies, but we have moved into other things, retro toys. We did an episode about forts. We've done just a few. We just did one on the Atari 2600. So we have lots of different topics that we're covering on Throwback Reviews. And Sean and I came up with the idea that if we're doing all these, shows about throwback stuff, about retro stuff, that we'd like to have a group of podcasts that could kind of advertise for each other, but more importantly, a single landing, like a website where you could go and you could find out about all these shows. And so what we've launched is throwbacknetwork.net. And I think there are currently either 7 or 9 shows on throwbacknetwork.net. So, if you go to throwbacknetwork.net, you'll find the latest of all these shows. You'll find the latest episodes of You Don't Know Flack. You'll find Sprite Castle. You'll find Throwback Reviews. Ferg's 2600 Game by Game podcast is on there. The Intellivisionaries have been added. I'm trying to think. Oh, Doug McCoy. And Doug McCoy does 3 different retro podcasts. I don't know how he manages to do that. I know Doug is married and has a young child. I tell you, I do a lot of my podcasting late at night after everybody's gone to bed, and maybe Doug does too. But Doug's doing, I think, 3 different shows right now. He's doing the episode, oh gosh, I forget the exact name of it, but right now they're going through the Twilight Zone, the version that ran in the 80s. They're going through it episode by episode. It's Doug and Vic Sage, which you may know from Throwback Reviews and from The Retroist. They have a couple other hosts on there. Doug also does a podcast with his wife where they pick a movie that one of them hasn't seen and the other one has, and that's really interesting to listen to. I just listened to several episodes of that on my last road trip. And he does another podcast, my favorite one that Doug does, which is Creepy Cool Movies that are from the 70s and 80s that he saw growing up. And he talks about them now. So he talks about how he remembers them and he watches them again. So, but anyway, throwbacknetwork.net. Go there and you'll find links to all those websites, all those podcasts. As soon as those are posted, new episodes of those shows are posted, they show up on Throwback Network, and there should even be a link to click and play and listen to those. So all good stuff. We're looking for other retro-themed shows that want to get in on the network. It's no cost. We're not making any money off it, but basically we're just trying to find like-minded people that are doing retro podcasts, and it doesn't have to be video. We're a little heavy right now, to be honest with you, in the video game sector. I know that we have talks with one or two other people right now about adding some other video game related show, but I'm looking for anybody that's doing retro type shows, anybody that's talking about older, whether it's movie reviews or old music. I don't know that I have any old music podcasts on my feed, but any of that kind of stuff. So if you listen to any podcasts or you know anybody, or maybe you do a podcast that would fit in with the Throwback Network, check out throwbacknetwork.net and take a look, and maybe you'll be able to find somebody else that fits in on that network. The other thing I wrote down here I was going to talk about is the MIST computer. That's MIST. And I had a little paragraph here written down about the MIST computer and about how I really wanted one. But I'm not going to read that paragraph because I bought one. And so that's going to be the next episode of You Don't Know Flack. So I don't want to get in about all these things that I think it might be, because on the next episode of You Don't Know Flack, I will tell you exactly what it is. The MIST computer is a FPGA. It's basically a programmable or flashable computer. You can flash the processor with different cores that people have written. And the reason it got the name MIST, which is M-I-S-T, the M-I stands for Amiga and the S-T stands for Atari ST. And there are cores right now for both the Atari ST and the Amiga, and it uses SD cards for storage. So it's this little tiny box. I'm looking at it right now. It's sitting on my desk, and I have 2 SD cards. I put one in, and this thing boots up, and it becomes an Amiga, and I can play Amiga games on it. I take that SD card out, turn it off. I put in the other SD card, turn it in, and this machine becomes an Atari ST computer, and I can play Atari ST games. So anyway, I don't want to talk too much about the MIST because I'm going to be talking about that on episode 143 of You Don't Know Flack. But the MIST computer, very cool, and I'm glad that I ordered it right before the furlough kicked in. So it arrived, and it has given me something to play with. Feedback. Let's see. I have a couple of feedbacks off my last show, or in regards to my last show, which was about the Raspberry Pi. The first was from Tex Hogger, who has been listening to the show for quite a while. And Tex dropped me a little hint. He said one of the hints that he dropped me was a link to a program called Classic Shell, which is for Windows 8. I had been complaining that I had Windows 8 on my new laptop, and I didn't know how to do anything without a start button. And so Classic Shell, which is available at classicshell.net, will add a start button back to Windows 8. And it has become so much easier for me to navigate things. I also found that by hitting the actual Windows key on my laptop, I can flip back and forth between the normal desktop and the Windows, whatever it's called, the Metro interface. Yeah, that was a very good link. Thank you very much for that. classicshell.net. He also told me that he got his Raspberry Pi a couple of weeks ago, and he's been trying to get MAME and MES running on it. And he says he's new to Linux, so he's learning on the fly. And he's trying to get his tank stick working, which is a MAME, like one of those MAME control panels with joysticks and buttons and stuff. He also said he's downloaded the issues of Magpie magazine, which is a good resource for learning about things you could do with the Raspberry Pi. So that's getting MAME and MES up and running. I have not played around with MES yet very much. I think I talked about on the Raspberry Pi one, the Pi MAME build. I found that one very easy to get up and running on the Pi. Like I said, it doesn't run 100%, but it runs pretty darn good. And I also have been using the SCUM emulator for the Lucasfilm point-and-click adventures a lot lately, especially during my little time off. I've been playing a little Maniac Mansion and Day of the Tentacle, so that's good stuff. I also got an email from Vintage Volts, who is another longtime listener to the show, who called me out a little bit, basically to defend the Arduino. And he said it's not designed to be a computer, so I was kind of comparing apples and oranges, I guess, between comparing the Raspberry Pi and the Arduino. By the way, I'm very glad, I should mention that over the weekend I picked up a pop filter, which is doesn't mount very well to the Blue Yeti here, but I have a system here that's working. The Blue Yeti has kind of a unique little microphone stand. But since I'm talking about the Raspberry Pi computer, Last time I was very worried about popping this microphone all over the place. So hopefully this new mic filter will keep me from either popping the microphone or just spitting all over the place. But anyway, Vintage Volts, he says that the core is written in C, but it's more like Java mixed with BASIC. So it's not a full-blown computer like the Raspberry Pi, but it's very good at what it does. And then he mentioned some different examples like reading sensors and producing output. It's a lot more convenient to hardwire into a product because it's instant on. It doesn't have the overhead of booting an operating system like the Pi. And then he said one of the things I said was that since the Arduinos were not all uniform, that I was afraid they would be incompatible. But he did say that the code is mostly portable between the different models, that it's great for hardware interfacing, and that the Pi might be better for software interfacing. And then he said, it depends on what you want to do with it, and they're both very good for small-scale environments. So I will take back, I don't think that I said that the Arduino, maybe I did. I didn't mean to say that the Arduino was bad and that the Raspberry Pi was good, but definitely for my application, I was more interested in the Raspberry Pi. And so I'm still glad that I bought one. And, maybe later on down the road, I may still look at the Arduinos and if I have a project that I can apply one of those to, I would like to look at one of those. But, so anyway, thanks for writing in on that. If you have feedback about this episode or any other episode or the show in general, you can always email me your feedback at robohara@robohara.com, or you can leave a message for me on the You Don't Know Flack voice mailbox, which is 405-486-YDKF. Hey, and that sound right there means the rest of the show has loaded from my trusty Commodore 64. Yes, that's right, the Commodore 64, the only personal computer, except for one, that is capable of holding the entire You Don't Know Flack podcast. The other one would be the Commodore 128. Not an Apple II. So, that's a little shot for Carrington. Carrington and Mike, Carrington specifically on No Quarter, called me out for missing weeks of the You Don't Know podcast, You Don't Know Flack. And he's absolutely right. And so the No Quarter guys, if you don't listen to their podcast, which if you ever played a single arcade game and enjoyed it, you should go listen to the No Quarter podcast. Those guys have been, I didn't realize it had been a year. Obviously, I mean, every week you see the number of the episode. But they just released their 52nd episode, so congratulations to those guys. It is very difficult to do a podcast on a weekly basis, and they pulled it off, so congrats to them. No congrats to them on their Map Mania scores. They just recently played Map Mania, and I called them out on their Facebook page. They didn't mention that on their podcast, but I'll mention it here. Their scores were, I think Carrington's score on Map Mania was 6,000. Okay. Maybe you don't have a good point of reference of what a good Map Mania score is. I went to go play Map Mania while I was eating cereal, and my score was 250,000. So, they really, and I think Mike's was slightly better at 22,000. So I only beat his score by, 200 and something thousand. And what's funny is, I forgot what, they picked another game recently, and I played it, and I couldn't get anywhere near their scores. But notice I don't talk about that one. I only talk about the ones that are good. So anyway, congratulations again to the No Quarter guys for pulling that off. Congratulations to all the guys on throwbacknetwork.net that got their shows up and running and everything. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get Earl Green on the phone. Okay, on this week's show, I have our special guest, Earl Green, on the line with us. How are you doing today, Earl?
I am awake with not nearly enough caffeine, but we'll do this somehow.
All right, that'll work. And now, physically, where are you located at right now?
Physically, I'm sitting in a parking lot while my son's in school.
In a parking lot in Arkansas, right?
Yes.
All right, yeah. And I did my, the Ninjas episode of You Don't Know Flack. I did that in a car. I actually did that when I was in North Carolina, and there were several times where I thought people were going to either pull up and either arrest me or kill me. one or the other. So if you see anybody approaching your car, let me know.
There are a bunch of guys out here with weed whackers, so I'm guessing it's I'm guessing it's a good day to sit in here while they work on the grass in the little islands out in the medians out in the parking lot.
Lawn maintenance day.
So
I love it.
So if you if you hear that, no, I'm not over here, going trying to make lightsaber sounds. That's these guys.
That's what we
should
do. We should do a podcast where we're each mowing the lawn, and then we call each other.
Yeah, I actually tried to record a podcast once while I was using the lawn. Well, while I was mowing the lawn, and I thought I had it down to a dull roar, and even, I had the little microphone with the windsock inside a bandana pressed up against my face, so maybe this would blot out the sound. Let me tell you exactly what I heard when I listened back to the file. And Charlie Brown's teacher in the background.
Nice, yes. I have used the noise canceling plugins before to quiet, ambient noise down, but really what I found is there's no solution for a quiet room. I mean, there's no better spot.
This is why I do my podcast in the bathroom most of the time. I would probably be there now if I was at home, which is more than anybody listening to this wanted to know.
I'd like to see if it gets too hot
really
in the car there. No. This is the audio only. But if it gets too hot in the car, maybe you can move into the bathroom there at Target.
Yeah.
And then continue the show from there.
Yeah, don't mind me. I'm just in the stall talking to myself.
Well, you know what? I've seen stranger things in the Target bathroom, so I'll just leave that where it is.
Okay.
So, for people that are not familiar with your work, where's the best place where people can find? What do you do on the internet? Where do you hang out at?
Well, aside from hanging out in the Target parking lot in Arkansas, I run thelogbook.com, which is going to have been on the web for 20 years here in a couple of years.
20 years, wow.
But before that, it was a creature of the BBS world. And so technically next year, 2014, is year 25.
Wow. And you were were you more a Commodore guy? You were more an Apple guy, right?
Yeah, I was on the Apple II BBS scene in this area many years ago. Although the funny thing was the Apple users group disbanded, and so I hung out all the time with the Commodore users group, which is, if you remember from OVGE a few weeks ago, the young man you presented with the Sega Genesis. Well, his dad was someone that I knew way back from the Commodore users group in Fort Smith.
Oh,
which that's a whole story we'll have to fill in later.
Yeah, so Earl and I, where did we actually, I'm trying to think, I guess we met probably through, the first time we met was at OVGE, right?
Yes.
Okay, but we kind of, we got to know each other on Digital Press, and that was, I'm trying to think when I first got on Digital Press, it was probably,
03 maybe?
Yeah, 2003. It was right around the time of that first OVGE. So we've been talking online for a decade now, which is crazy. When we were both pre-kids, I guess.
Yeah, but we're both old BBS rats, ex-sysops, and it's just kind of like the thing that amazes me is that we didn't bump into each other earlier.
It is because we have so many of the same circles and same people that we run into. So I know that we have old video games in common and old computer games in common, but another thing that we have in common is our love of Star Wars and Star Wars toys. Obviously, anybody that's been to the logbook knows that you are interested in much more than just Star Wars. You have a huge Doctor Who area. You have Star Trek. You have some fairly obscure stuff. I know I've seen some, I think, Blake 7 references on the website. So,
yes.
So you delve much deeper than just Star Wars.
Well, it's the site has just kind of grown tentacles, to account for all of my interests, so I can vainly try to, write them all off on the taxes. Actually, not really. It's easier than registering 20 different domain names, but we have
Sure.
Yeah, we have a section that's TV shows and movies, and everything's covered, in depth. And you can stream the stuff on Amazon from there. And the episode guides are the oldest. That's the part that's running up on being 25 years old. The episode guides are what started up on local BBSs. Including one of mine, which was the worst BBS in the known universe because I was trying to run it on a Franklin Ace 1000, and the primary drive that I had in that thing, slot 6, disk 1, would crash and wipe out the database. And so the next week I would relaunch the thing under a different name. Oh, look, new BBS, even though it's at the same number. It's like there had to be 45 different BBSs at that number.
I remember BBSs doing that from time to time.
And yes, under new management. Yes, it's the same guy with a different handle, but thanks for playing.
Right.
And
I also had a Franklin Ace 1000, by the way.
Yeah, how is it that we did not run into each other until 2003?
I know.
It's like I'm your twin brother who was in the attic. I was there the whole time.
I thought there was just a rat scraping up there, but it was actually Earl trying to get more blank floppy diskettes from me.
Feed me.
By the way, did you read, I don't know if you read what happened to my Franklin Ace 1000 recently, but I was, we were having a garage sale, and so I had set some things up on top of my golf cart. I have a golf cart for no apparent reason. And so anyway, the kids hopped in and said, take us for a ride. And I forgot that the Franklin Ace was on top of the golf cart. And so I took off, and it made it surprisingly far. It made it about a block away from my house. And then I hit the brakes, and it just went sliding. So not only did it fall off, it fell off right in front of my face. I mean, it went right off the roof down, and when it hit, spectacular was the word that came to mind. I mean, pieces flew in every direction. So the case, well, the corner of the case was broken, but most of it was all scratched up. I don't know how many keys are on a Franklin Ace 1000, but I have probably a third of them in my possession. The other third being either in someone's lawn, or in the road. I mean, I collected as many as I could. I have, if anybody's looking for 2/3 of a space bar, I have one of those.
Control open Apple reset!
I was literally heartbroken. And I have a small army of Apple computers. I have Apple IIe's, 2C's. But the Franklin Ace was the one that I, physically grew up using. And so I've always had a soft spot in my heart for that machine. So, yeah, if there's any visual sadder than a 40-year-old man on his hands and knees collecting random keys from a keyboard in the middle of the street, I'm not sure what that would be.
Well, nothing good has happened to my Ace 1000. We put it out. We have a shed that's a pretty good little click away from our house, because we have a place with about 3 acres fenced in for a horse or cows or whatever. I mean, we rent it out because we don't have a horse or cows of our own. And there's a shed out there next to the barn. And when we moved in, my wife didn't want, any of that stuff in the house. And so it all went out to the shed. And, you run out of time to go out there and check on stuff. And by the time you do go out there and check on it, the back of it has caved in. Everything has been rained on. Rats have crapped all over everything. And that wasn't just the Franklin Ace 1000 that I started out with. It was the Ace 2200 that I got later. And the Ace 1000 that a friend of mine gave me when he, really had no use for a 64K of raw Apple-compatible power and a giant heavy Faraday cage. And, there are a couple of Apple IIe's out there. So the only thing I have left, all my floppies were inside. So I have pretty much all of my surviving software collection. And I have an Apple IIc that's missing the 6 key.
Okay.
And that is actually about to be hauled out, dusted off, and I'm going to be teaching my son BASIC.
Absolutely, yeah. I read an article not too long ago, and it's an old article that gets floated around from time to time. And there is a prevailing theory that teaching BASIC to children is a terrible idea. And the reasoning behind that is that the logic used in BASIC, in theory, is different than what programmers do today. I mean, it's different than object-oriented programming. So basically, you're teaching them the wrong way to do things. I don't agree with that theory. I think some of the things that I learned in BASIC, I still use today. I mean, that type of logic where you go through things step by step, and if this doesn't work, you look at the line above, you see what's happening, you test, what's stored in your variables. That sort of logic, I mean, applies to, I do, network support. I do networks, and if somebody can't get, from computer A to server B, that's how I troubleshoot things. Well, can they get to other servers? Can other people get to that server? To me, that's all the same logic that we learned back in the day programming with BASIC. So, no, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, if then is still if then. What's gotten more illogical is people.
I will agree with that. So, you're roughly the same age as I am, I think. What year were you born in?
Boy, I'm trying to remember where I was when the whole Star Wars thing started. Because I believe I was slightly younger than my son is now. When my folks dragged me to the theater to see it. And I think before that I had seen one movie, and this is kind of frightening. There are select things that I remember from my early childhood, most of which have to do with some sort of media experience. Mm-hmm. I remember my first rock album. I remember the first movie I went to see was The Jungle Book, and my grandmother took me. But that was a cartoon. It was obviously not reality. Wasn't really that scary. And, and then I think I must have been 5 years old or so, because in Star Wars, the first movie, it did not have, unless you were a sci-fi movie fanatic and you were subscribing to Starlog or Famous Monsters of Filmland, which were both in existence already before Star Wars, you did not know that this big thing was coming out and that it was going to change your life.
Right. No, yeah, it was completely, it was just another movie when it first came out.
Yeah, and so I do not believe I went to see it, on opening night, or I don't know exactly what date it was. And I think I was 5 years old, so that would put it after July of 1977. So it had been out for a couple of months.
Okay.
And
yeah, I was right around that same time. My parents actually went before I went. They went, because I was born in 1973, so in May 1977 when Star Wars came out, I was 4, and then right around like a couple of months later. So my parents went. I guess it started building this little following, and my parents went to go see it. My dad was always a sci-fi type of guy. And both my parents enjoy going to movies and stuff. So they had gone to see it, and I guess they decided that it was something that I would enjoy. So they went back to see it a second time, and they took me that second time. And I remember from that first viewing, I've told people before that the opening scene where, Princess Leia's ship, flies overhead, and then you see the Empire chasing them and shooting. That scene right there has cost me personally thousands of dollars in Star Wars toys. I mean, as a 5-year-old kid, when I saw that scene, I was hooked. Now, and I have also admitted this, I'm pretty sure within the next 5 to 10 minutes I fell asleep. Because my parents have told me that I fell asleep and that they woke me up during the cantina scene. And then when I saw the cantina scene, then I was really hooked, and I did watch the rest of the movie. But yeah, that opening scene right there, I mean, to me, that within the first 30 seconds, that was definitely something that changed my life.
Oh yeah. I do not remember what I was interested in before Star Wars. I have no idea. But, from that point forward, everything branches off from that. Because I got into computers because I was interested in robots and read up on what robots are. I got into space, which, I am a real life space junkie. People these days, don't keep track of, what's lifting off, what's going where. Oh man, I'm all over that because of, largely due to the Star Wars question and answer book about space, which I still have. And I busted out recently. I found my copy of it, the old hardback, and I was going to present it to my son, and I was reading through it just going, oh man, I remember this. Wow, this is so 40 years ago. This is wrong.
Right.
This is completely wrong now. So it kind of went back. It's still on my bookshelf. It's not on his.
Yeah, but that's funny that you mentioned that, and I have the same book. I have mine sitting right over here next to me on a shelf. But once Star Wars began to explode, it was more than just the toys, and I want to talk about the toys, but you mentioned books, and I remember having Star Wars books and Star Wars posters, and I had the Star Wars, the R2-D2 C-3PO alarm clock, and I had the C-3PO toothbrush and a Star Wars watch and shirts and on and on and on. So it was like anything that kids would want, not just collect. I mean, now we think of, collecting toys, but things to play with or do or wear or having, curtains, sleeping bags, anything like that. All of us, within several years, you would find those things branded with Star Wars.
Oh, yeah. But the funny thing was, at first, there wasn't a lot of that stuff there because licensing a movie for products like that, it just wasn't done. I mean, the most recent comparable thing that you had would have been either Space 1999 or Planet of the Apes, and both of those were, Mego got the license to crank out the 12-inch G.I. Joe-sized figures. And they put them on the market. With Space 1999, they did the ship, which was this big, beautiful thing with all the girders and everything around it, and the big engines at the back. And I remember you could actually take it apart and put it together as a smaller one. But, they did one wave of toys, and they were out of there because those things were not expected to have a shelf life. And
right,
and the Star Wars stuff, I don't know if you remember this. There was at least half a year gap between the movie and the first figures showing up.
Right. I know that, the figures and stuff really didn't start showing up until 1978. I know that in 77, that's when they had the early bird package, which is now and this is a funny that reflects on the collector's market. It's one of the most, maybe not the most desirable, but a very expensive thing to own, which was the early bird package, which was basically, what would you call it? A gift certificate that said, hey, once we've made these figures, we'll send them to you.
Yeah, which nowadays, if someone put that on the market today, you would have the Federal Trade Commission going, wait a minute, what? It's like a Kickstarter project.
Right, yeah, I'd have to keep one eye open while I slept if I put that in my kid's stocking,
And the funny thing is, I did not know about the early bird package for many, many years. I had never heard of it. First time I ran into the figures, and I actually remember the first two figures I got on a visit to Service Merchandise. Does anyone remember that store even existing?
I do very well. Maybe it's this part of the country. I remember Service Merchandise really well.
Yeah, and there was a Service Merchandise in Fort Smith at Central Mall, which was, back in the day was one of two competing malls. Now it's kind of it's almost like a ghost town, and the other mall that was competing with it is now a call center. It's a call center owned by a company that hires people to badger people on the phone about their unpaid doctor's bills.
Yes, we have the mall that used to be a mall that then was the AOL call center for a while, and now I don't know what it is. Actually, what it is the place you don't want to leave your car at overnight.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yep.
But service merchandise, yeah, that was the first time I ever even knew there was any such thing as Star Wars toys. I remember having the bed sheets, the blue toothbrush with a decal of C-3PO on it, which is probably the same one you're talking about, electric toothbrush.
Yep.
And I remember having this craptastic orange lightsaber, which all it was a flashlight with this big plastic tube on it and a filter at the bottom to turn the light. I don't know what color they were trying to turn it, but mine was kind of like urine yellow. That, everyone had different colored lightsaber blades in the prequels. I was the guy with the piss yellow lightsaber.
Was that an officially licensed lightsaber?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Because I had one that I think my grandma got for me at a garage sale that was not officially. It was basically a flashlight with a long, clear, or kind of smoked plastic tube on the end of it, and then a little plastic color disc that went inside. So whatever color disc you put in there is what color the thing would glow. So mine was green, and of course the weight distribution, because the handle I think had 4D batteries. This is before the time of watch batteries and things, right? So it was literally like a 5-pound flashlight with this plastic tube. So you could really swing it around, which I did, and then you could really get it taken away from you if you hit your sister with it, which I also did.
Exactly. Yeah, I remember chasing my older brother around with the thing, and the only reason I think I got that was because there was a flashlight that was supposed to live in the kitchen. I remember it had a magnet on one side and it was attached to the refrigerator, and it was shiny and silver. Now that thing looked like a lightsaber, and I kept on running off with it. And so that's how I came to have a lightsaber of my own, was because my dad was tired of having to look for the flashlight before he went into the basement to find something.
One of the most disappointing things about the new Star Wars toys, and I'm sure we'll get to that eventually, but I never had any of the original life-size guns as a kid, like the Han Solo blaster or the Stormtrooper rifle or whatever.
Oh, I had tons of them.
Oh, did you?
Yes, I had the Han Solo blaster and the Stormtrooper blaster. Now, and this was back in the days before they were going to put an orange tip or an orange handle on everything. I mean, they looked hardcore. They were great props. Right.
That's what you could probably rob a liquor store with, the Han Solo blaster. But I recently, well, not recently, 5 years ago maybe, when they re-released the new ones, I was like, this is something that I never had as a kid. And so I heard they were releasing them, and the Han Solo blaster, it doesn't have an orange tip. The entire thing is orange.
No.
And it's molded in orange plastic, and the Stormtrooper one is molded in white plastic.
Yeah, I have seen those, and I thought it was lame.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, who's gonna, I don't know. I mean, it's just, I guess a sign of the times or whatever. And this is for people, I guess this is to prevent people who were planning on robbing a store with a Han Solo blaster who don't also have access to spray paint. Yeah. I don't know what this is supposed to prevent here, but
hand over your cash in the name of the Empire.
Right. These Republican credits.
Don't make me force choke you.
I had probably one of the best childhoods, especially when it relates to, overall, I would say, but also specifically as it relates to Star Wars toys. Was very lucky that I had a dad who was into photography. So I have pictures of a lot of these things. But on Christmas morning, 1978, I have a picture of me sitting in the floor of my bedroom, and from left to right, there is a TIE fighter, an X-Wing fighter, and a land speeder. So I got all three of those things, and then scattered around are, I don't think it's all the figures that were available at the time, but it's a lot of them. I mean, and it's all the heavy hitters. You have Luke, you have Han and Chewie, and Obi-Wan and Darth Vader, and everybody's all lined up there. And there's part of me that thinks that may have been the greatest Christmas of all time. And there's another part of me that kind of kicks myself, or at least kicks my parents, for saying, God, do you know how much money I would have if you hadn't opened those things?
Yeah. Well, Christmases were awesome. I remember specifically best, actually, Christmases and birthdays especially, because it's all you, baby. And
Right, yeah.
I distinctly remember my birthday in, I think it was 1982, because for one thing, my mom had to decorate the house, and so they had to get me out of the house. And so they, handed my older brother $30 and said, take him to the arcade, keep him there until we call for him. And
nice.
And so, it's hanging around the arcade for 3 hours. Who doesn't love that? And in 1982, when it was, it was the happiest place in the universe.
Oh, that would have been a great birthday right there.
Yeah, I mean, nowadays, my son wants his next birthday to be Arcadia. And I'm like, well, what do you want? Well, what do you want for your next birthday? I want to go to the arcade. I mean, that's all he wants. That's all he has plans for. It's like, hey, okay. I know the guy who runs the place. We can make this happen. But, yeah, back then it was like 3 hours in the arcade. And, finally my brother went to the payphone and called home. And I guess he got the okay, because I noticed he was making lots of phone calls.
Right.
Because,
this is pre-cell phone days, sure.
Yeah. And so he was going to the payphone a lot, and he had handed me, he took all this money over to the bill changer and gave me about half of it in quarters. So for one thing, my shorts were falling down. Because quarters in pockets. And, but at the same time, I was having no trouble finding something to spend those quarters on. I mean, every game in the room twice. But he kept on going over to the payphone and calling home. Finally, he said, we got to go. And I was like, oh, because I thought that was it. That was my birthday. I was cool with it. And then I went home, and this was about 2 years after The Empire Strikes Back. And, every possible creature, setting you can imagine. And everyone forgets these now, that these were in existence at the time. But we also had the micro collection playsets.
Yes, yeah.
Like little tiny metal army men, except they were Star Wars characters. And they had whole settings that interlocked. There were 3 different Cloud City playsets and 3 different Hoth playsets. And it was like all of the micro collection at once.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I wish I still had that stuff now. The micro collection I did not keep up with for whatever reason. And, so many memories related to Star Wars items that, I just want to go back in time and tell myself, okay, would you please put these in a box and put that box in a safe deposit box? I mean, do it now while you're 12. You just do me a favor, okay?
Now, it's funny you mentioned that birthday, because I had a few Star Wars. I remember getting a few things on birthdays and things like that. But I found a picture recently, and it was from I believe it's 1983. So this would have been my 10th birthday, and it is a chocolate cake that my mom made for me. And on top of the cake, she stuck what were the little tiny, you remember in like an Empire Strikes Back, around that era, they had the little, like the mini vehicles?
Yes. The mini rigs.
Yes, mini rigs. It's there's a mini rig stuck in this cake, and then there is a twin pod cloud car figure, which does not go with the mini rigs, but I will forgive them. Anytime people bought me Star Wars stuff, I would not point out continuity issues. But
yeah.
I have a very specific memory of being happy that I got those things and delivered to me on top of a cake. And later, I very, very specifically remember this, trying to use my tongue to get the chocolate out of the little bottom hole of the figure. They had the little holes in their feet where they would, you could stand them on pegs. And this guy's was filled with chocolate icing from this cake. And so I remember later, like, just trying to get every last little piece of icing out of that. So as far as Star Wars toys, did you get a lot of, was it mostly like for holidays and stuff? I think that's when I got most of my stuff.
It's when I got most of the big stuff. Now, the figures were this year-round concern. Because I remember the first ones I got, I was talking about going to service merchandise. The first ones I got were Chewbacca and R2-D2. And there, it was no specific holiday. It just was. And
they were almost, for me, they were almost like currency. Like now, I remember, and this happened to me too, like where your parents would say, hey, I'll give you, $5 if you have a good report card or whatever. But back then it was like, for me anyway, hey, if you have a good report card, I'll buy you a Star Wars figure.
Oh yeah. It was, they were used as bribery quite effectively. And I remember one year, and I think this was 79, that Sears did the Cantina playset that was just this cardboard backdrop. Now, there were two Cantina playsets. There was one that was actually, there was a bar and there was a table. And, I don't know why I got the one and not... Actually, I do know why I got the one and not the other. Because, despite the fact that it came with 4 figures, it was cheaper. Because the background was just cardboard. And so it all fit in this tiny little box, whereas the other thing had a lot more packaging to it and, molded plastic and so on. Which, it's kind of funny. You think about it now. You think about the backlash you'd get. Oh, great, we're going to market this thing for kids, and it's a bar. Good going. Yeah.
That's true, yeah.
And,
Daddy, I want the one where Walrus Man got his arm cut off.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, my dad would have been like, okay. Because much later in life, he's like, you make great friends in a bar. And I'm like, yeah, Dad, when you're buying.
I have a funny Hammerhead story that I just remembered when you were talking about that. I had a Hammerhead action figure that I let my neighbor across the street borrow. And so he borrowed this figure, and when I got it back, his hand was all mangled. And I was like, what happened? And he said his dog chewed it up. And this became like a, I don't want to say it definitely escalated, into a thing where it starts with little kids like, you're not allowed on my property. Well, you're not allowed on my property, which, by the way, the bus stop was on their property. So they really couldn't kick me off their property. But, and then it got to a thing where like the parents got involved, and their parents, bought me a new Hammerhead figure and brought it over to me. And so I showed my parents, and they're like, where'd that come from? And I told them the story. They said, take it back. And so I had to take it back, and they had it. And then eventually it ended up in our mailbox. And so I did eventually keep it. And so I was fortunate enough that when I got old enough to stop playing with Star Wars stuff, when it was no longer cool to have it out on display or whatever, that I did box it all up. My parents had a big garage, and so it sat out there in the garage for years, and now I have it back. But as we moved into the new house and I'm unpacking, I'm like, why do I have so many Hammerhead figures? Like, I have 4 Hammerhead figures. I don't know why people, you have these like random figures that people have a lot of. But as I was looking at one of them, there's one and the hand is all chewed up. And so I know it's that specific one. I should probably find those people and give it back to them. Maybe they want it back after all these years.
Yeah. And in New Jersey, would have been a brick coming through the window with Hammerhead tied to it. Take it.
And it's funny too. I was just reading an article the other day about, I guess, how most of these people I guess because of the expanded universe, that most of these characters have names now.
Yes.
Like Hammerhead's name was not Hammerhead.
Yeah.
And Walrus Man was not Walrus Man. But when I was 6 years old, I didn't know what a Moma whoever was or, any of these things. I mean, I was just fine knowing them as Walrus Man and Hammerhead and Greedo and whatever.
I have never... I will go to my grave knowing, who Walrus Man is, what Hammerhead is, what Greedo looks like. Of course, Greedo's name hasn't changed, but everyone else, Snaggletooth, Snaggletooth.
Right, sure.
And yeah, well, yeah, because you're talking about the great Hammerhead exchange there. There's a Snaggletooth story that I'll get into momentarily, but I have never been able to memorize these names. The alternate names came in the 90s, in the mid 90s, or early 90s. Because West End Games did the big Star Wars role-playing, his first official Star Wars role-playing game. And that came out alongside the Heir to the Empire novels. That was really kind of the second blitz of Star Wars merchandising, but it was aimed at the kids who had grown up with it and were now hitting 19 and 20 and were too cool for school. And then little did we know that a few years later they were going to try to figures again.
Right. And we had jobs at that point, which was different than before.
Yeah, because I remember holding out forever against the Hasbro figures. Nope, not going to do it. Not going to do it. I've got the old ones. I'm good. And, then it was finally, hot damn, I'm 22. I've got a job. I'm getting R2-D2 with the light pipe in his head, and he's going to sit on my desk at the office.
Yeah, I did the same thing when the... right when the Power of the Force, I think that's what it was, right? Power of the Force line.
Yeah.
90, in the mid 90s, when that first came out, I was excited, but I feel like I was, embarrassed is not the right word. Embarrassed, not that I was embarrassed that I would be interested in Star Wars stuff, but I was a little disappointed in myself, I guess, at letting myself get excited about it because I thought, it's like when someone says, I'll give you $5 to flush your morals down the toilet or whatever. And you say, listen, buddy, I'm a moral, upstanding person. I can't. And then they say, how about $10? And you say, okay.
Yeah.
So there's the part of you that that you've just done something that you didn't want to do. On the other hand, you're like, woohoo, $10, And so I did feel like, at the time, I said, this is being marketed to people who grew up on Star Wars, who have money now, and all it is a way for them to get money. And then I still bought them all anyway.
Well, I held out for a while longer because of two things. The funny thing about me is I never stopped collecting figures. I still haven't stopped. But I have changed over the years, I've changed what I was collecting for. And in the early 90s, I think they kicked in probably around 92 or so. Star Trek: The Next Generation was what I was collecting. And I was spending obscene amounts of money on it. And then, of course, within a year, you had Deep Space Nine, and then they finally started doing Captain Kirk and so on. And it was such a money pit. So I can't claim any moral high ground. Oh no, I was too cool to be buying toys. No, I was just buying different toys.
Right, sure.
And I couldn't be bothered to shift my allegiance back to Star Wars. Especially not when Luke, the first wave Luke came out looking like He-Man.
Yeah, there was some interesting figures. I've heard the Princess Leia one referred to as Monkey Face Leia, which if you look at her, right, very accurate. It looks like a guy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very weird sculpt, for those other ones. And then remember, and this is where I got caught up, and this is actually more disappointing in myself than even buying them, is they had all the variations. Remember they had the long saber versus the short saber. And so, I mean, the first Luke that came out had a lightsaber that was the entire length of it's like 8 inches, not 8 inches. It was a 3.5 or 3 3/4 inch figure with a 5-inch lightsaber or whatever. I mean, it was as tall or taller than Luke was. It looked ridiculous. So they re-released it. And so that now, not only did you have to have the Luke, but you had to have long saber Luke and short saber Luke. And all the figures with lightsabers were like that. I remember, there was a, one that I spent a lot of time looking for it was Han Solo, with also the Han Solo in carbonite. And on the package it said Han Solo with carbonite freezing chamber, which that wasn't the carbonite freezing chamber. That was Han Solo in a block of carbonite. And so they went and updated the card later. So then you had to get the old card, and it really got ridiculous. It almost makes you wonder if they were doing that just to exploit that collector mentality.
I wouldn't be surprised. Because, I mean, they deliberately plan weird little stuff now. Now, the only... I never really got that much into variations, because like I said, I was on the Enterprise by that point. But eventually what got me back into Star Wars collecting in the 90s was that they started doing characters that were not part of the original lineup.
Right, yes.
And
yes.
I think about the time I finally gave in and said, oh, God, you got me. It was, I think they did Grand Moff Tarkin. And
yep.
And yeah, that was it. That was it. And
yeah, I remember there was several and more there, but in the original Kenner line, and that's where I would say my heart lies.
Oh, yeah.
With the Kenner line. I do have all the newer stuff, but those were the ones that we grew up playing with, and I know a lot of collectors prefer the newer ones and even the brand new stuff, just because the amount of detail and obviously the technology in more advanced sculpting and things like that. But the ones that I grew up with, I mean, those are the ones that I actually love, but we even had a joke back then, with the Kenner line was, if you were in the movie for 5 seconds, there was going to be a figure, and now not only is there a figure of everybody who was in the movie, but I mean, they have a complete backstory. They have a name. They have a wife and kids back home and wherever they're from.
Yeah. And they have, the reason I never really got into, collecting variations was because I was usually making my own. I mean, you talk about characters you didn't see. I don't know if you remember, Snaggletooth originally came out with Greedo, Hammerhead, and Walrus Man in this cardboard Cantina playset that was I'm pretty sure it was only at Sears. And
okay.
The Snaggletooth that came with that was tall, and he was wearing a blue outfit because they had a black and white reference photo, and it was like, hey, just get it done. We got to get this made in time for Christmas '79. Mm-hmm. And because the reason there was a Cantina playset that year was because we had just had the Star Wars Holiday Special, which there were large chunks of that took place in the Cantina, except with B. Arthur turning the Star Wars universe into a musical, which, everyone's too cool for school on the Holiday Special now. I have a confession to make. The first time it came on, when we watched it live the night it was broadcast, I loved it.
I don't know if I saw it. I'm sure I did. I can't imagine there being something on TV Star Wars related that I wouldn't have seen.
Well, some people, if they have traumatic memories, the mind just works to blot them out completely. But one of the happiest moments in my life, later when I had a job and I had my own money, was tracking down on eBay a VHS copy of this, complete with some Kansas City newscaster, some white guy with a fro, jumping in during the commercials. We're going to be fighting the Frizzies tonight at 11. And or whatever it was he was talking about.
Right.
And, but the Cantina characters, I'm sure, came out that Christmas because it was right after the Holiday Special. And Blue Snaggletooth was a mistake. He was a little short guy in a red outfit. And they did do that. And I also remember Blue Snaggletooth had boots. Red Snaggletooth, for whatever reason, was barefoot.
Right.
And,
so, did you have a Blue Snaggletooth?
Oh, I still have Blue Snaggletooth.
Oh, me too. I have one sitting right here.
But, the funny thing is, you were talking about this war going on with your neighbors across the street. When the blue snaggletooth thing happened, it sort of became conventional wisdom. Oh, now that they've released this other one, this one's going to be a collector's item. That got taken away from me instantly by my parents. Oh, we're going to put this away. This is going to put you through college. The blue one did? Yeah, the blue one.
Okay.
And, so they got me the red one. I was like, oh, but I want them both. And it became this ongoing war to see how well they could hide it. And, it was like I could smell it. I always found it. And finally they gave up and they're like, okay, just take good care of him, okay? Which, most of my Star Wars figures have a common defect, which is that the house was smoked in heavily. So I have I have lots of yellow stormtroopers and so on, and but the other thing was I would inflict these amateur paint jobs on my own figures. For whatever, I had to customize them for whatever reason. I thought I was going to make them cooler. And there are two figures in particular that stand out that I remember. One was Boba Fett. I remember they had those glittery metallic ink pens, permanent markers.
Yeah.
And I changed the color of Boba Fett's armor. Now here's what's funny. You flash forward 25 years after that, and it's like I had the world's first Jango Fett figure, and I didn't know it.
You were just ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and I still have that one because, I like to show people, hey, you remember the Jango Fett figure that came out in 78? Well, here's mine. But the other one, the other thing was that I went through R2-D2s like they were popcorn. And here's the reason with that. R2-D2 was my buddy. And you have to keep in mind, I was still 5 years old when the figures started coming out. And so R2-D2 went everywhere with me. I ate breakfast with R2-D2 next to the bowl. I tried to smuggle R2-D2 to school. In fact, I succeeded many times. And, would have him given back to me by the teacher at the end of the day once I'd been found out. But the downfall of the first R2-D2 figure that I had, that one that I got in service merchandise, was I took him to the bathroom with me. And for whatever reason, because I just could not be without R2-D2, I had done my business, I had flushed the toilet, and something happened, because I remember there was this toilet paper dispenser that had a little lip over it, next to the toilet in my bathroom. I probably put him on top of that. Finished doing my business, and I probably reached over to put the lid down on the toilet and knocked him in.
Oh, no.
And so and there he goes screaming right now. But the thing was, water was clean, so it was like, oh, get him out, Mom. Well, the decal just sloughed right off.
Right.
And the original R2-D2, all the detail was on that sticker. And if that came off, you had this white cylinder with nothing on it. And immediately the, whatever they used, the metallic finish on his head, that immediately turned green.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if it was dunked in water to that degree. And the blue paint turned yellow. And so it was kind of interesting.
Oh.
His head.
Yeah, kind of a psychedelic, yeah.
Yeah. So, the head was kind of interesting, but there was no detail. And so my mom, being the artsy, creative person that she was, she said, well, I will draw, I will try to draw on there the details. Because I also had the 6-inch R2-D2 that went with the 12-inch figures.
Okay.
And so she looked at that and she drew it on there as best she could with permanent marker, and then she sealed around it with plastic tape or something. She cut a piece of plastic tape and wrapped that around it. And so it had all these details that weren't quite right. And you had this green head with yellow highlights. And my older brother never let me live that down. Now, I did get a replacement R2-D2 in pretty short order. My mom took pity on me there. But I always kept that one, the green one. And my brother called it R2-P2 because it had fallen in the toilet. And
yeah, I was going to go with R2 Poo Poo, but yeah, I like his too.
Yeah, so we had R2-D2 and R2-P2. Hey, it fallen into clean water. Yeah, I never would have seen that thing again if it had fallen into a dirty toilet. But
right.
Yeah, it would have been okay. Fish him out, throw him away. But go ahead. But anyway, I was going through a box of stuff that I found in my attic not too many months ago, and to my amazement, I discovered that R2-P2 was still with me after all these years.
Oh, wow.
And so it's my first Star Wars figures now. He sits up on a shelf, and my son's
R2-P2.
like, "Why is that one green?" And I'm like, I'll explain later, because I do not let him take toys to the bathroom for that very reason.
Right. You're like, I'll tell you later, but in the meantime, don't put that one in your mouth.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I only tried customizing 2 figures that I can think of off the top of my head. One was, I remember that at some point I lost R2-D2 for some reason, and so, but R5-D4s were plentiful. They were kind of like the hammerheads of the droid universe. Nobody really wanted R5-D4. I mean, in the movie, he's the guy that blew up, so I had taken because I'd lost R2, I had taken a R5-D4 and tried to change him into R2-D2 with a blue marker, and the results were, basically it just turned everything purple and smeared around a lot, so it was not a great solution at the time. And then also, I don't remember if it's before the Wampa was released or if it's just before I had one. But I had several, and I still have most of them, of the ones I originally had, of the 12-inch Star Wars figures that you mentioned. But of course, there was no 12-inch Wampa, that you could play with or whatever. But what I did have was the 12-inch Sasquatch from the $6 Million Man. And if you remember it, it's a goofy looking thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks a lot like Chewbacca, actually, except for there was a button that you pressed that would shoot his chest off that showed his robotic insides. I was not a big $6 Million Man fan, so I'm not sure why Bigfoot was a robot. You probably know the answer to that.
I forget. All I know is that as a little kid, I always referred to it as the $6 man because I could never remember a million. And I still kind of think of it in those terms.
Right. Well, I had the $1 Wampa because with a can of white spray paint, the $6 Million Man Bigfoot became my 12-inch Wampa, and it was very poorly painted and very sticky. So I was not very good at customizing the figures. Now, I will tell you, when eBay kind of came into its own in the late 90s, early 2000s, I started trying to, and it's still an ongoing thing, I'm trying to quote unquote complete my original collection.
Yeah.
And I started looking at custom figures, and there are a million custom figures out there. Some of them are, improved figures, you might say, that were from the original film. Some of them are expanded universe type figures, characters that have only appeared in the books or whatever.
Yeah.
And then some of them are kind of, I guess I would just call funny or comical or unique. And one that I found was Garth Brooks. But it was a Darth Vader one. And so it was Garth Vader.
Uh-huh.
And so it's Darth Vader, except for the front of his chest piece is quartered, and it's that checkered black and white shirt like that Garth Brooks used to always wear.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if they made this or if they got it from something else, but on the top of his helmet is gone, and he's wearing a big cowboy hat. And it came with a lightsaber and a couple of small beer bottles. And So and actually I don't know if it's it could be Garth Vader or Darth Brooks. I don't know which one you want to call him, but, so I still have that guy, but that's getting into collecting other people's customized figures is a really slippery slope.
Yeah, that way lies madness.
Yeah.
Because, three things back to back got me into the mode where I was thinking I was going to complete my collection. When I lived in Green Bay, it was about the time, and I'm going to say this was 98. Yeah, I remember, actually, yeah, it was 97 or 98, because that's when I was living in Wisconsin. And there was a book called The Star Wars Action Figure Archive by Steve Sansweet. And I distinctly remember that book because it was this glorious thing where, they had a picture of every figure that ever was in the Kenner or Hasbro lines up to that point.
Okay.
And, I just got it. The book was discounted because it was about to be outdated because episode 1 was coming out the following year.
Right. Yeah, new stuff was coming, sure.
Yeah, and everyone knew it was outdated. And so I think I picked it up for like $7, took it home, and, the drool just started pouring off my lower lip. It's like, oh, I didn't know they'd ever gotten around to making Luke as a stormtrooper. And stuff like that, because my main interest was in the section of the book dealing with the Kenner figures.
Right.
And at the time, I was also undergoing this dental surgery, which required repeated visits. Because it had to be done for a variety of reasons in little small sessions. And literally in the same strip mall, shopping center, wherever you want to call it, was a place called Toy Exchange it's on the east side of Green Bay. And I used to go in there, and I would go in there after I had had my sessions of dental surgery when I knew I wasn't sharp enough to drive yet. And so, of course, I walked in there doped up, looking like the Elephant Man. Hello, how are you doing? I would like to browse your selection of Star Wars toys. Drool just pouring off my lower lip again. It seems to be a common thread here. And in very short order, I also discovered that they had old video game cartridges. Pre-NES stuff. And so, okay. Yeah, the dentist visits were very expensive. Not because of the dentistry. My insurance was catching that. But it was because I was, staggering over to Toy Exchange, waiting to come out from under the haze of the anesthetic so I could drive. And I would go over there and I would easily drop $30 on Atari cartridges and ColecoVision cartridges and Star Wars figures. Mm-hmm. That I'd seen in this book that I didn't have yet. And I actually picked up quite a few things that I did not have or ones that I'd lost.
Right, yeah, that's definitely part of Star Wars collecting for me is, you're absolutely right. There are two different categories that I find myself buying things in, and I'm still buying Star Wars things, and I'm still an idiot, I know that. But it's, as far as the old stuff goes, one is replacing the things that I remember having that I no longer have. And the other one is as more and more of those, like you said, those price guides, come out or whatever, seeing the things that we didn't have. I decided probably 6 months ago, I would say, I got this, I just moved to a new house about a year ago, and I got these shelves, and I thought, I'm going to drag my Star Wars stuff out and put it on display. And so I got all my Kenner figures, and I put them on these shelves. And there were a few figures that I thought, I know that I had this guy at some point, but I just didn't see him, and for some reason, it maybe it's floating in a toilet somewhere, but, I don't know where they ended up, so I thought, well, I need another Death Star droid. I need a, whatever. And the other thing is, as I started looking through, I'm like, I guess my Star Wars collecting must have tailed off around 84. And the reason I say that is because as I look through these price guides and figure guides and stuff, I don't seem to have anything that was released in 84 or 85. Now, we got our Apple, we had a TRS-80 computer in 1980, 80. And then we upgraded in 82 and got the Apple or the Franklin Ace. So I suspect that between the computer and the Atari that my interests begin to change around that time, because when I look at the later, like the Return of the Jedi playsets, I don't have hardly any of those. I don't have, I can't even think of all of them. I don't have any of the Ewok Village stuff. I never had an ATST. So all those things that are associated, the Jabba the Hutt playset, I didn't own any of those, but I had almost everything from the first two movies. So it seems like that's what dropped off. So I have been scouring eBay, and this has been a nightmare. As I look through the figures, I set up all my Kenner stuff, and I used to tell people I have basically all the Kenner figures. Well, what I found out first of all, when I went online was that's not true. Yeah. I was missing a lot. I was missing over like 30 figures, which I had no idea that I was missing that many. And some of them were quite simple to track down. I mean, I didn't have a Jawa. Well, that's an easy one. Go on eBay. There are Jawas for $5 all over the place. So there were, I didn't have the black Bespin Guard, which I kept referring to as the African American Bespin Guard. Yeah. But everybody said that no, there's no African American people in outer space. So he's just listed as black, Bespin Guard, but I didn't have him. So I got him. So those were all easy to pick up. And then what I ran into, and you've probably seen some of these, are, I'm gonna butcher this guy's name, but, like a man, I think is how it is.
Yes.
And Yak Face. And the cheapest Yak Face, when I looked on eBay, the cheapest Yak Face I found for sale was about $500. Buy it now. So what happened to these figures? Why are these hundreds of dollars?
Well, they were produced toward the end of the run, and the thing was, you talk about your interest shifting. Everyone in our age group, everyone's interests were shifting around that time. Because video games and hormones and stuff like that, and He-Man. And so I think it was a matter of, they kept making figures, and everyone's allegiances were shifting to other interests. And so I did not have an Man back in the day. I have one now. I'm kind of embarrassed how much I paid for him. And yet, I look at the prices now on a Man. You look on eBay, it's like, oh, now I'm glad I only paid that much.
Right.
Because I probably got him about $2,000 or so. And, which was a huge mistake, because I probably could have gotten him cheaper 2 years earlier if I had known that eBay existed. But the thing about getting anything Star Wars in 2000, if we had just had a new movie, oh yeah, everything was stratospheric prices.
Well, that's what I'm watching happen right now again on eBay, because we have the news that there are new Disney Star Wars movies coming, and they just, I guess last night aired the trailer for the new Star Wars, what's it called? Star Wars Rebels?
Really?
Is that what it's called?
I missed that.
Yeah. Well, if you blinked and you were watching Disney, you would have missed it. It is literally a recreation of the opening scene of the flyover of a Star Destroyer. And it says, there's a little talking thing, and I may insert it into this part of the show here, but basically it just says, at a time when Jedis were up and coming and the Empire was rising or whatever, and there were Star Wars Rebels. So there's no new visuals. There's actually nothing new. I guess it's exciting that they aired something, but it's not very much meat on the bone, so to speak. But
to battle the Empire, a rebel alliance will form. The Jedi will rise, and you will know the power of the Force. Star Wars Rebels, coming in 2014 to Disney XD.
Yeah, with all the current excitement and all the new Star Wars figures that are being released again, I think it's going to drive the prices back up. So please don't put that a man back on eBay, because it's going to cost me a fortune when you do it.
Well, and the thing was, you talk about Yak Face. Yak Face was, I believe it was only released outside the U.S. for whatever reason. I think because most of the yak faces that I've seen pictures of, if they were carded, they were on what was called a tri-logo card,
Right,
which
yep.
it's actually, it's not really different logos, it's multilingual. And so most of your yak faces in North America, I believe, came from Canada. And so they had the cards that were in English and French and maybe Spanish, just for giggles. I don't know why they would have done Spanish in Canada. But, of course, they also could have been intended for sale in South America as well. Yak face, because you're talking about your quest to complete your collection. I have a nearly complete collection, and I accumulated all this stuff, around 2000, 2001 or so. And yak face was where the rubber met the road, and I said, I'm okay not having all of them. And I broke down and got a $3 yak face from the Hasbro collection, and I'm happy to have it.
I that's where I got with and on Throwback Reviews and Adventure Club podcasts. I've done episodes on both of those recently about collecting Atari games, and that's exactly where I got because of the rarity guides and stuff like that. I found myself really enjoying collecting Atari cartridges and not playing very many of them, especially now that we have emulation. If I want to play Chase the Chuck Wagon or Air Raid or any of these super, rare and super expensive cartridges, it's one mouse click away for me. I mean, a click on the computer and I can play Air Raid. If you've played Air Raid, it's a ripoff of, I think, Space Jockey, which in itself appears on a lot of people's lists of the worst Atari games ever. So it's not, you're not paying for a quality game. You're paying for the fact that it's super rare or whatever. And I just found that I wasn't willing to do that. A lot of my collecting, be it Atari, Star Wars, whatever, dropped off around the time of eBay and people all of a sudden deciding that everything they had was worth a fortune. When you could go to, I've told people this before. When I was collecting Atari games, I would go to work and tell people, that I collected Atari games, and the next day they would bring a giant box of all their Atari stuff, and they're like, hey, I was going to throw this out. It was in my closet. This is garbage. Here you go. And I inherited Star Wars stuff the same way from people that would say, it's not, this was in my kid's room or this is my old stuff and I don't want it anymore. Here you go.
Well,
so there was a time.
I'm sorry. Go on.
No, I was just going to say there was a time where that happened. And once people said, oh, well, I'm not going to give you this dirty old, R2-D2 that's been floating in my toilet because now it's a one-off and I could put it on eBay and get $1 million, or that's what people think anyway,
Yeah, I need to come up with the backing card for it and get it in the bubble and I'm set. No, but the video game collection, most of my video game collection, I wouldn't exactly say I had a world-class collection. I had a collection I enjoyed accumulating and enjoyed playing, but it got to the point where I was out of work. I needed to come up with money somewhere. And so, this was, 2009 or so, I believe, was the year I went to OVGE with huge tubs of cartridges and came home with a house payment.
Right.
Because it had to be done. And, I remember my wife was just overjoyed with that. And she's like, well, you were planning on getting rid of this stuff eventually anyway. And I kind of got serious for a second. No, really, I was actually kind of planning on sharing this with the boy at some point. And, end of awkward end of discussion. But,
right.
But at the same time, I knew it had to be done. The Star Wars figures that I've got, the old Kenner figures, because you were talking about, people bringing you boxes of Atari games. Most of my Return of the Jedi figures I accumulated the same way because I kept on collecting stuff, and my mom was really adamant at a certain point, I think around 84 or so, okay, you've got to stop playing with those, grow up. And so, she was of the mind, we needed to put them away, we needed to get rid of them, we needed to have a yard sale or something. And I resisted that notion with every ounce of strength I had. And so finally what I did was I took a bunch of my dad's empty cigar boxes and I ripped the lids off and I spray painted them all. And in some cases, I even waited for them to dry before I attached them to my bedroom wall with thumbtacks. And I set the Star Wars figures in those. And,
oh, nice. And
it was a display thing. And, my mom begrudgingly is like, well, it's not like you're playing with them day in and day out. And I'm like, yes, that's right, Mom, because, what she didn't know wouldn't hurt her. But because, the other thing about the Star Wars toys was they changed the whole industry. Everyone used to make stuff in the G.I. Joe scale. And then the moment the Star Wars toys took off, everything was in what is now called Star Wars scale. Which is right. Your average height of an adult character is 3¾ inches. Mm-hmm. And at the time, there's Star Trek the motion picture, and Buck Rogers, and what else was it? The Black Hole, which is a movie that I dearly love, even though I acknowledge the fact that it makes very little sense. But they had the coolest robots this side of R2-D2. And so, the Black Hole robots were always running around with the Star Wars robots in my room. And
I had at the time, I had a fairly large collection of, Adventure Price.
Yes.
Or Fisher Price Adventure People.
Yes.
And, I've joked before that, I would make Han Solo and Chewbacca, when they needed a break from smuggling, they would get into the little green van and go down by the river and take the kayak and have a little thing. But yeah, no, I was there. I did have a couple of Buck Rogers. There was the Battlestar Galactica.
Yes.
Ships that were the same scale, and also, Clash of the Titans. So, sure, when Princess Leia got tired of Jabba's crap, she would hop on Pegasus and fly off into the...
And, of course, G.I. Joe. I mean, that was the other universally compatible thing. And G.I. Joe figures, I would get those, and, I wouldn't even have had them for a week, and I would give them a new paint job so that they fulfilled some function in the Star Wars universe. So my box of Rebel troops runneth over.
Yeah, I never got into G.I. Joe. I never got into He-Man. For me, it was basically, I had some other friends I had a friend who had a lot of G.I. Joe stuff. The only G.I. Joe figure I think I ever had was maybe one or two of the ninjas, and that was more because I was into ninjas than, G.I. Joe. But, and I was always jealous of the articulation.
Yeah.
Of the G.I. Joe figures, because you could do so many more things with them than, just the Kenner figures, where you could, move their arms and legs and most of them their heads.
Right. And if you were lucky, they still had the peg holes in their feet. And so, you'd wind up with, I remember also having ninjas stationed on the Death Star. So there you go, Rod. Your dream come true right there. Yeah, Death Star, ninjas. Okay, I'm done. It doesn't get better than that. And,
that is a wonderful collision of worlds.
Yeah, and but I would try to pose them with this extra articulation, and then for whatever reason, the Death Star would sit on the shelf with these ninjas in it. And 3 years later, I'd look up there and I'd pull that down, and it's like, what the hell are these guys doing? Interpretive dance?
Is there any toy on the market today that is as wonderful as that Death Star playset was?
No, there is not. And I have a theory about that. And this is probably a little bit pretentious BS, but my theory is because it had locations that kind of sort of represented what you saw in the movie without duplicating any of it exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes so non-specific that you can use it for anything. And I remember at one point, the support struts for I think it was the second floor that had the consoles on it.
Yeah.
I lost something or something else broke, and the whole thing would no longer stand up. But
okay, yeah.
But it was so non-specific, I would just put that second floor on a table, and those two consoles. Well, that's the Enterprise right there, or whatever. I mean, I would fly that deck of the Death Star around by itself like it was its own ship. I didn't care.
Right.
And I think so many of the later, and a lot of the Star Wars playsets were like that. They were meant to evoke the setting without duplicating it. And I thought that was such a smart, now I realize that was such a smart move. Now the playsets you get, this is the hexagonal corridor before they jump into the trash chute. And it's so specific, it cannot be anything else.
Right. I remember the early Tatooine playset that had the sandcrawler in the background,
Yes.
and the cardboard sandcrawler, and then you had this little area, and there was like, there's a little kind of, a little cave-like area where you would put a Jawa to shoot R2,
yes.
And you had the escape pod. But what I would do is take that, I had this brown blanket, and I would throw it on my bed and just make all these little hills and all these things on the blanket. And then I would put that in the middle of it. So it was like I was expanding to the whole world of Tatooine, so you would have stormtroopers over here. And so that was just one area where they would go. But yeah, you could, and in Kenner's defense, they did reuse some of those.
Yeah, they did. Because I was about to say, the first Hoth playset, they did two different Hoth playsets using the exact same base, painted grayish white. Mm-hmm. And it didn't matter that you never saw caves on Hoth that anything popped out of to shoot R2. That cave was still there, and that knockover switch was still there for whatever reason. It's like, what is that? The Wampa cable? It's a little bitty Wampa.
Right, and there was the tank treads from the sandcrawler.
Yes, exactly. But mini rigs. Blame it on mini rigs. Yeah, I was talking about the box that I recently. That's my second all-time luckiest Star Wars find, which I'll get into the first later. Which this is about to turn into a freaking 3-hour podcast here.
I know, yeah.
But the box I was talking about, where I discovered that R2-P2 was still with me after all these years, had all of those cardboard play sets and their bases in it, intact, or mostly intact.
Oh, wow, nice.
Because what it was, my mom had packed this box at some point. This was around the time when, when she was like, "You're done playing the Star Wars figures. You're done. Grow up. Get an interest in girls." Mm-hmm. Why? I can't bend them like I do these people. Well, that's a matter of some interpretation, but that'll be a subject of another podcast at a later date, which can only be listened to after 11 p.m. by people over the age of 21. But the thing was, she boxed all of this stuff up. I mean, she at least had the foresight to keep it. Yeah, she figured out that I was going to be really... This was shaping up to be a lifelong rift if she actually got rid of the stuff. So she folded all the cardboard pieces down and disassembled everything and put it in this box. And I also found in there the handheld movie viewer that Kenner made.
Oh, yeah.
With a film cartridge in it.
Oh, nice.
And I found pieces. There was a Star Destroyer playset, which was it could only dream of being as cool as the Death Star playset. So the thing about the Death Star,
right.
you could fly that deck around. You could turn it around, face it the other way, so the slim, so the elevator end, the thin end was going forward. Well, that's shaped like a Star Destroyer. That is your Star Destroyer. It's got consoles. Stormtroopers can sit back there and fly the thing backwards. Doesn't bother them. But there's part of the Star Destroyer playset in there. There was some Star Trek stuff in there, and an Imperial troop transport that was missing two of its prisoner containers, which I think I offered that to you, and very quickly learned, okay, not only does everyone still have that, but everyone still uses it as a pencil holder. Everyone.
That's what mine was for a long time. Yep.
And that kind of goes to the story of the first all-time lucky Star Wars haul that I had, which was that in the year 2000, I had just moved back from Wisconsin, and at that point I had been hauling my entire collection around with me in boxes from place to place for years. I'd never gotten rid of any of it. And, some of it was the worse for wear. Like I said, my Death Star had no chance of ever being assembled again. But, I kept the pieces in boxes because at some point I was going to figure out how to get all this stuff, restored to its former glory. Well, the summer of 2000 rolled around, and I had a self-storage unit. Because we had a small apartment, and this was a bigger fight than you would think, but the truce that was finally agreed upon was that the figures would be in the apartment, not on display, but I would keep them in the apartment with me, but the ships and the playsets would be out in the self-storage. And so about a week before my wedding, I went out there to pay the bill, and I would always go and check on the stuff. And I went up to the door of my self-storage unit, and the padlock that was on it wouldn't open with my key. And then I looked at it and realized it was not the same padlock. And I went to the front office where I just, written them a check for $40 or whatever it was. And I was kind of like, okay, what the hell is this? And they had no idea, and they handed me a bolt cutter. They said, if anyone's going to cut the padlock, it's got to be you. So I went to the door of my storage unit and cut this, the wrong padlock off of my storage unit. And I had been robbed. Big time.
Oh, no.
And all of my stuff was in these waterproof Rubbermaid containers that in themselves were not cheap. All of my Star Trek ships, all of my Star Wars playsets, aside from this one box that I just recently opened up that I didn't realize I still had some of it with me. But most of the good stuff, the Death Star, the Millennium Falcon, the X-Wing, the various TIE fighters, the Land Speeder, the Bespin Cloud Car, the Tauntaun, the Wampa, all that stuff was gone.
Oh, man.
And so I went to the front office and said, okay, I guess we got to check the tapes because I've been jacked pretty good in there. Some very valuable stuff. Oh, well, the video surveillance system is not working. And I distinctly remember just kind of leaning across the guy's desk and looking him in the eye and saying, okay, inside job? And he didn't have a word to say to me. And so I just loaded the stuff in my car, aside from a couple of bookcases, which obviously wouldn't fit in the car. And, I got my money back and left the place then and there.
Right, yeah, sure.
But that doesn't get the stuff back. Well, a few years later, I'm going to say this was 2006, I believe. A friend of mine who, his name's Dave Tomer, and I've got to name check him because, this is like, you talk about weird coincidences. He was sort of my right-hand man on the logbook. And he wrote stuff, and he would be the stuff who would copy edit my crap because, I would, misspell stuff and, put wrong punctuation somewhere. And so he was my right-hand man he would catch my crap that I had written wrong. And he sent me an email out of the blue and said, okay, my college roommate has a bunch of Star Wars stuff still in the boxes that he is tired of hauling around. He wants it to go to a good home. He wants insurance that he offered it to Dave first. But Dave had a daughter who was about 3 years old at the time, and Dave was like, no. And so Dave contacted me, and he said, here's the conditions. Keep the stuff safe. Don't sell it. Because it's not that his college roommate is going to want the stuff back, but he wants to, if he wanted it flipped, I'm sure he would like to do it for himself and make the money off of it.
Sure.
And so the thing was, Andrew was going to give it to whoever would promise him not to sell the stuff. And I was like,
oh wow.
That would be me. And so
I'm your guy.
yeah, right over here. And so these 3 massive boxes arrived on my doorstep about a month later. And we're talking, each of these boxes cost something like $35 to ship.
Oh, man.
And I opened them up, and in the original boxes, but the boxes were open, so, you were not, it wasn't like all this stuff had never been touched, but it was kept in the original boxes, was almost everything a duplicate of almost everything that I had lost in my self-storage robbery. But in much better shape.
Okay, so you don't think Dave robbed you?
No, I don't think Dave robbed me, because the stuff I got from this haul was in much better shape than mine. It had not been subjected to my, sitting around bored at the age of 9 with permanent markers. I am going to paint this deck of the Death Star black. Because every other deck is black. This deck needs to be black too. I actually did that to the second floor of the Death Star at some point. But all of this stuff was in much better shape. Still had the pieces. You can stand the whole Death Star up. The only thing it's missing is the trash masher. And you know what? I'm okay with that, because my trash masher had gone missing at some point many years before. And what I had taken to doing was parking the Imperial troop transport in that hole.
Oh, yeah, it's like a little garage.
Yeah, and so I was totally okay with it. Yeah, I mean, because this was the Barbie dream dollhouse for boys our age.
Oh, yeah.
And so the trash masher was not a big issue. It became the garage for the troop transporter. And, I remember roaring that thing out of there with sirens wailing like it was some kind of fire truck on several occasions when I was a little kid. And so, yeah, I was, the trash masher being missing was not a setback, because I also had this brand new Imperial troop transporter. Yeah, baby. Back in the garage with you.
Sweet. Well, you are right. This is probably going to end up being I think we're at an hour and a half right now. So with the other stuff I'll add at the beginning, we're probably looking at another one of my marathon episodes. So we'll probably have to reel things in. And I definitely want to do a second episode, but we'll do a sequel to this.
Okay.
But before we do, I want to ask you, I'm going to tell you one of my favorite Star Wars collectibles that I still have. And it's one of those that's really worth nothing financially, but it's just a favorite thing. And then I want to ask you if there's anything in your collection, like maybe what one of your favorite things is. But I got married in 1995. And actually, it was I'd already been living with my wife for about a year, and we knew we were going to get married, but we didn't know when we were going to get married. And my sister had planned a wedding in August of 95, and then her fiance got into some legal trouble, and the wedding was called off. And so so basically that date became available. And what was convenient was that a lot of our relatives from out of town had already purchased tickets and were planning on coming to Oklahoma on that date. So we said, you know what? We'll have a wedding anyway on that date. So, I don't know. I still am not exactly sure how it's supposed to work, of what the groom is supposed to plan and what the bride is supposed to plan and all this. But basically I was told that there was a church in Yukon, Oklahoma, and I and several friends had better be there the day of that wedding in tuxedos. And that was pretty much my end of the bargain. My wife took care of everything else. Her and her friends took care of the flowers. They took care of the decorations. They took care of all these things. And her sister, in fact, was a cake decorator and did the wedding cake, and also did my groom's cake, which I had no idea what it was going to be or had seen it or anything. And so, after the wedding, we went to the reception hall, and I come out, and there is the groom's cake, which is this giant bluish gray kind of cake. And on top of the cake is my Darth Vader TIE fighter, and then a painting or an icing depiction of the Death Star. And, which, by the way, was one of many signs that I had found somebody in life that understood me. When my wife and I moved in together, I've told this before, the first two things she unpacked were her Commodore 128 computer and a framed picture of the Three Stooges. So I had a pretty good sense that this was going to work out. So she had played this groom's cake, and it had my Darth Vader TIE fighter on top of this cake, and surrounding it were two wooden cutouts of R2-D2 and C-3PO. And if you look at these things, at first glance, from across the room, they look like something you would purchase. But then when you get closer and look, you can tell that they were hand cut out and hand painted. And so when I asked her about them, they actually belong to a friend of mine, my buddy Jeff, and his mom is very good at arts and crafts, and she's one of these people that always paints, has things in her yard and crafts and all these things. And so when my friend was young, she actually made these. So I would say the C-3PO is probably 2 foot tall, and then R2-D2 is to scale. And they were just, painted on wood and then cut out or whatever. But, after the wedding, I asked my buddy if he wanted them back, and he said, no, I don't care. And so I still have those. And, even though they're not anything that you would buy in a store, and they're not anything that would be worth money or anything like that, I think those are two of my favorite things just because, I don't know, to me, it kind of sums up, it gets past all the monetary stuff, that's associated with Star Wars now, where you have to buy everything, collect everything or whatever. And it just kind of shows like how much kids loved Star Wars. So even if it was these wooden things that you would put on a wall that represented R2-D2 and C-3PO or whatever, that kids would still be happy with that. So I think those are, a couple of my favorite things out of my collection. Is there anything in your stuff either that you used to have or that you have today that has any kind of special meaning to you?
Well, there's, in some respects, it's just tempting to say all of it.
Right,
because
sure.
My childhood kind of got truncated at an early age, for a variety of reasons. And I think that's part of the reason that I have hung on to the stuff that I have for as long as I have. You talk about old cartridges, old floppy disks. The video games that I sold a few years ago were the ones that I had collected on eBay and, through various other means, various swaps and trades. And so what I have now are the cartridges that I had as a kid. I don't want to get rid of those. And, it's
right, sure.
Sort of the same with the toy collection, but, two things, and one of them just sits on a shelf and does not do anything, no matter how many times my son asks about it. It's a very old Star Wars thermos. Because if you're anything like me, you used to have the metal lunch boxes for every stinking movie.
Oh, yeah.
And this was the thermos that came with the original Star Wars lunchbox. And it's got the artwork is all on a decal, and it's very crude depiction of C-3PO and R2-D2. And it's been beat to hell. I used the heck out of that when I was a kid, and the lunchbox as well, which I no longer have the lunchbox. But written on it in my mom's handwriting is my name. And so, my son keeps asking about it. I want to see that. And I'm like, no, actually, that's mine. And that stays on the shelf. And that is literally one of the only things I have that has my mother's handwriting on it. And, she has been gone for such a long time. It's kind of weird. Little stuff like that you want to hang on to. And really, not because it says Star Wars. I mean, it could be the $6 Million Man Sasquatch thermos for all I cared. And, would have that sentimental meaning to me. But
Sure, but that's definitely a tie between, obviously you said that your mom, knew how much you like Star Wars and stuff, so that's cool that you have a tie of all those things together in one item.
Yeah. And the other one, for really exactly the same reasons, and, as silly as this is going to sound, is R2-P2, who lives on top of that thermos.
So they're both there together.
Yeah, in all of his green glory, because that's kind of the one thing my mom taught me was not everything has to be store bought. Now, of course, the moment that Kenner took possession of every child's allowance for the rest of time, that kind of got shot to hell. But she kept on telling me, okay, if there's something they don't make, you can make it yourself. And she would try to show me ways to do these things. And it's kind of funny because I've tried to pass that on to my son. But, I've got memories of backdrops that I drew by hand and things like that, sadly I no longer have because they were probably on, taped together index cards that have, who knows what's happened to them.
Sure.
But, I had that hexagonal Death Star corridor before anyone made one. Damn it. But, R2-P2 was kind of, it's kind of where she was showing me how to do that, and it's kind of a story of not only creating something new out of something that has, has fallen on hard times, but,
right.
it's I don't know, it's kind of like, this is going to sound so pretentious, but it's kind of the symbol of overcoming adversity. And so, yeah, these two beat up old things are sort of, they're up there with my most treasured, not really my most treasured merchandise, but my most treasured memories, really. And, neither one of them is anything I would care to part with. So, R2-P2 is, a man's not going to throw them onto eBay anytime soon. Say, you first.
Well, very cool, man. Well, hey, we're definitely going to have to do this again. We need to get into a part 2 and kind of get into some of the newer Star Wars toys and collectibles, because I want to ask you about some of the new lines that are coming out, what you think of that, and how it compares to the old stuff. But, man, it's always a good time to talk to you. I always have a good time, and now, really, all I want to do is hurry up and hang up on you so I could go on eBay and go see if there's a Man-O-Man or Yak Faces come down in price at all.
I mean, one of these days it's going to come down to, sitting around a craps table in Vegas. Come on, baby, Yak Face.
I know. I'm really hoping that at some point you fall on hard times and have to put a Man-O-Man back on eBay.
Well, the funny thing is, around the same time I was trying to, fill holes in my collection, I was picking up these things called star cases, which they make them in, the size of Star Wars figures, these little plastic things with hangers. I mean, you could put them on peg hangers if you had some from the store or whatever, and they're sized for one figure, and you can stick the guns in there, whatever. And the funny thing is, I stuck a Man-O-Man in there after he showed up in the mail. I don't think he's ever come out. Because right. I haven't put the stuff back on display. If I put it back on display, which I'm planning to at some point, a Man-O-Man's finally going to get some air, but I'm sure he's in there going, what the hell, dude?
I hear you, man. Yeah, I've got a few of those myself, so. Well, all right, Earl. Well, it was a pleasure talking to you, and we will someday in the near future pick up, reconvene, and do a sequel to this episode.
Absolutely.
All righty, man. Well, I will talk to you soon.
Okay.
All right. I'd like to say thanks again to Earl for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, and we will definitely be doing a follow-up episode to this, a sequel to the Star Wars. We will have a episode 2 Star Wars collecting episode coming out soon. So, thanks again to Earl for coming on the show. I really do appreciate your time, and I always have a good time talking to Earl. That pretty much concludes this episode of You Don't Know Flack. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, hanging in there with me. We are coming up on the 1 year of all these You Don't Know Flack episodes. So, will there be more episodes? I don't know. We'll have to see. In the meantime, check out Sprite Castle, my new tube cast that features Commodore 64 gameplay. And check out throwbacknetwork.net for all of your retro podcasting feeds. With that, I believe this brings episode 142 to a close, and I will talk to you guys next week on episode 143 when we will be talking about the Mist computer.
Lo vale, lo tiro, fala, utilo, go, go, go.